From the outside, Goodrich's maple farm in Eden doesn't look like a traditional sugar house. But make no mistake, this building has one purpose and one purpose only: making maple syrup.
We boil sap. That's what we do. We take water out of sap to turn it into maple syrup.
The Goodrich family began turning sap into syrup in 1793. They sugared for another century and a half before calling it quits in the 1950s. By the time Glenn Goodrich and his wife Ruth returned to the old ways, they had to start from scratch.
In 1979, I went into maple only knowing how to gather buckets. I had never boiled before, I hadn't done any retailing before, didn't know anything other than how to dump a sap bucket into a gathering pail and bring it to the gathering tank. That's what I knew about maple. We had no idea of turning it into a business. But it's a little bit contagious or addictive.
Since their start, Glenn and Ruth have built a thriving maple business. They sell and install maple equipment, ship syrup worldwide, and have become ambassadors for Vermont maple. A couple of years ago, Green Crow Timber Company asked Glenn to consult on 6,000 acres of forest land in Eden. At the time, he didn't think it would have much to do with maple.
Lots of times when a timber company owns a piece of land, they're not focusing on maple trees to produce sap. They're looking at logs, and so I suspected that this wasn't going to be a very suitable site for maple production. But when I studied the maps, topo maps and aerial photographs, and then walked the property, we discovered that yes, this is a very good maple site. To have a tract of land this big that can all flow to a couple of drainage sites, it just doesn't happen very often. I've been installing tubing systems professionally throughout the US for 30, 40 years, and there just aren't many out there. So we then turned from being a consultant into being a potential renter of the property.
In May, Goodrich and a work crew of 9 started tapping trees and running tubing. 1,532,000 feet of tubing to be exact. That's 290 miles, or about the distance from Eden to Bar Harbor, Maine. So far, 36,000 taps have been installed. A drop in the bucket compared to what Goodrich plans to do.
Each year we will add approximately 50,000 taps. This past year we've fallen a bit short of that goal because we had to build the sugar house and the pump station and the pump line and do lots of infrastructural things to prepare for the next years. We're pretty confident that this next year we'll get 60,000 plus added, and so a year from now we'll be boiling from 100,000 taps and then add the 50,000 each year after that.
By 2021, Goodrich plans to have 200,000 taps installed.
I'm 62 years old, and most people at this point in their life wouldn't want to jump out and do something like this, but challenge is what I have always thrived on, and so here we go.
The sugar house Goodrich built to process all this sap measures 10,800 square feet. There's only one evaporator in here right now. The plan calls for installing 3 more. At the back of the sugar house is where the sap is stored. At full capacity, it will take 28 minutes to fill one of these 13,000-gallon sap tanks. Goodrich has put in 5 in all. To get the most sugar content out of the sap, sugar makers rely on reverse osmosis. Referred to as an RO, this machine filters out water and concentrates the sugar and minerals in the sap. In addition to this higher concentration, ROs also reduce fuel consumption by 80%.
Raw sap, 2%, it takes 44 gallons of sap to make a gallon of maple syrup. Here we're concentrated to 30%, and so it takes 3 gallons to make a gallon. And so you can see the efficiency is huge. Our RO machine can handle 6,000 gallons of sap per hour. The evaporator here is boiling about a little less than 500 gallons per hour. So huge reduction in volume through the RO machine. Efficiency is a big part of being successful in this business, whether it be energy efficiency or human resources efficiency. You have to really focus on efficiency to make it work.
Where the efficiencies, size, and scale of this operation sugar off to is in the growing market for maple.
So that's a big deal. Our demand for maple syrup is rising somewhere between 5 and 8% per year, and we need to increase the production to match that demand.
So there's money in maple?
Yeah, there's a lot of money in it. We just try to keep a little of it.
Maple production is no joke. Nationwide, sugar makers are making more syrup than ever before. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, maple syrup production in the United States went from 3.4 million in 2015 to 4.2 million gallons of syrup in 2016. That's a 20% increase. 2016 was a record year for production, but in 2017, sugar makers topped that mark by an additional 2%, going from 4.20 to 4.27 gallons of syrup produced. Mark Isselhart, maple specialist with the University of Vermont Extension, says the current growth in maple syrup production is due to expanding markets and consumer interest in this one-of-a-kind product.
It's a sweetener. Fundamentally, that's what maple is. It's a sweetener. There are lots of other sweeteners that are less expensive, but maple has lots of things going for it. Very simple ingredient list. You're just boiling sap down. It has a unique blend of minerals that aren't found in other sweeteners, and it has the story of being, produced from trees over many, many years. So it has a lot of attraction, and there's been work done marketing and growing the markets globally. So it's no longer just a regional product. It's actually being sold in Asia, it's being sold in Europe, it's being sold elsewhere. And so that demand grows, and there's need for more production, so people are jumping in.
In his role as an educator and researcher, Isselhart focuses on making sure Vermont's maple industry is sustainable and maintains its value in the culture of Vermont.
Tree health is still critical. I mean, you're talking about tapping trees over the long term. So you have to do it in a responsible way, a sustainable way that maintains tree health, as well as providing for new generations of maple trees to be growing underneath. There's only so many places in the US that have the density of tappable trees, the climate that is suitable for ideal sap flow, and a workforce and a tradition of producing it and the know-how. And Vermont has all three.
While the look of Goodrich's maple farm differs from the traditional imagery of maple sugaring, the quality of the product remains constant.
I will acknowledge that there is some tension between the way sugaring used to be done, or the imagery of sugaring, and the way it's done now. And what I think of is, are people more concerned about the product or the process? Because the process of making syrup is very different. But fundamentally, the product needs to be the same high quality that it always has been. The imagery is stuck in the 1800s, but the industry has moved on. The industry has adapted.
For Glenn Goodrich, the more things about sugaring change, the more sugaring stays the same.
I had two old fellows in here yesterday, and they said, oh, gee, back when we did it, we used buckets and it was hard. And I said, well, it's still very hard. We just plan to do more trees per man now than we ever have done before. It's like driving a car. If you started and learned to drive on a 1950 Chevy, do you mind driving your new BMW? Probably not. It's going to be fun just the same. And that's the way it is in maple.
No matter how much sap flows from the trees or boils in the pans, sugaring is farming, and farming is hard work. The Goodrich family doesn't seem to mind the work. You might even say they're sweet on it. In Eden, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.